He was the firstborn son, the one who was meant to chart the course, to set the example for the siblings who followed. He carried the weight of expectation, the silent burden of being the eldest Johnston child. But today, Jonah Johnston's life is not a blueprint for success. It's a cautionary tale. We've seen the struggles with Delta 8, the revolving door of careers, the humiliating retreat back to his parents' home, only to be kicked out. His life appears to be spiraling, a slow-motion catastrophe playing out for millions to see. And while the show would have you believe this is a story of personal failure, the truth is far more sinister. The person who lit the fuse, who fanned the flames of this disaster, might be the one you'd least expect: his own father. If you're ready to uncover the story that TLC doesn't want you to see, the calculated takedown hidden behind the curtain of family values, then make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and ring the notification bell. You are not going to want to miss a single second of this deep dive into how Trent Johnston allegedly engineered his own son's downfall. To understand the depths of this betrayal, we must first examine the story as it was carefully curated and presented to the public. This is the official narrative, the one spoon-fed to audiences season after season. It's a simple, digestible story of a young man struggling to find his way, and of two loving, concerned parents doing their best with a difficult situation. On the surface, it's a classic tale of tough love. We are first introduced to Jonah's post-high school life with a sense of promise. He lands a job as a car salesman, a role that his father, Trent, a man who prides himself on his people skills and work ethic, seems to genuinely approve of. We see the scenes of Jonah in a slightly too large suit, navigating the showroom floor, a symbol of his entry into the adult world. Trent and Amber express their pride. This, they seem to say, is the first step. This is how a Johnston man begins his journey. But the cracks begin to show almost immediately. The narrative pushed by the show is one of Jonah's inherent lack of motivation. The long hours, the pressure to make sales, the competitive environment, it all seems to weigh on him. We are shown conversations where Trent expresses his disappointment. He talks about his own youth, about working hard, about pushing through when things get tough. The implication is clear. Jonah doesn't have that same fire, that same drive. The story isn't about a bad job fit. It's about a flaw in Jonah's character. He's lazy, he's unmotivated, he lacks the grit required to succeed. We see Jonah's confidence begin to visibly erode. The family conversations at the dinner table become less about encouragement and more about interrogation. How many cars did you sell? What are your numbers? Why aren't you trying harder? Each question, filmed for a national audience, is another chip away at his self-worth. Eventually, as the narrative dictates, Jonah loses the job. This is presented as a major failure, a confirmation of his parents' fears. He then drifts. There are mentions of other jobs, other attempts to find his footing, but none of them stick. The show frames this period as a long, aimless wandering. Jonah is depicted as sleeping late, lacking direction, and becoming increasingly withdrawn. He's living at home, a man-child under his parents' roof, failing to launch into the independent life they so desperately want for him. The tension in the Johnston household becomes a central storyline. Trent and Amber are at their wits' end. They implement rules. They give him deadlines to move out. They try to teach him about financial responsibility. From the viewer's perspective, this all seems reasonable. They are parents pushing their adult son to finally grow up. They are doing what any responsible parent would do, albeit with a camera crew documenting their every move. This narrative arc culminates in the most dramatic storyline of all, the intervention. The discovery of Jonah's use of Delta 8, a legal psychoactive substance, is presented as the terrifying climax of his downward spiral. It begins with a phone call, a moment of pure television gold. Jonah's speech is slurred, he's incoherent, and he confesses to his parents that he is scared of what the substance is doing to him. For any parent, it's a nightmare scenario. For a reality TV show, it's a ratings bonanza. The show then meticulously documents the aftermath. The family meeting, the confrontation, the tears, the fear. Trent and Amber stage a full-blown intervention. They sit him down, they read their prepared statements, they express their fear and their disappointment. They present an ultimatum. Get help, change your life, or you can't live here. On the surface, this is the story of concerned parents saving their son from the brink of a substance abuse crisis. They are portrayed as heroes, stepping in with tough love to pull him back from the edge. They confiscate his Delta 8, they set him up with a therapist, and they lay down the law. The official narrative is complete. Jonah Johnston, due to his own lack of motivation and poor choices, fell into a dangerous habit. His parents, through their strength and unwavering commitment to his well-being, intervened just in time. It's a neat, tidy story that casts Trent and Amber in the role of saviors, and Jonah in the role of the prodigal son who lost his way. It's a narrative of personal responsibility, with Jonah bearing the full weight of his failures. And for millions of viewers, this is where the story ends. They see a troubled young man and the parents who love him enough to be hard on him. But that is not the real story. That is the performance. To find the truth, you have to look closer at the architect of this entire narrative, the man who stood to gain the most from his son's public collapse. Trent Johnston. Now, let's pull back the curtain. Let's rewind the tape and watch the same scenes not as a concerned father, but as a calculating producer of his own family's drama. The story of Jonah's failure isn't a story about Jonah at all. It's a story about Trent's rigid, suffocating, and ultimately destructive expectations. This is where the official narrative begins to crumble, and the image of Trent as the benevolent patriarch shatters into a million pieces. The first part of this reframing is understanding the impossible standard Trent imposed on his son from the very beginning. Trent Johnston's identity is built on a very specific, almost archaic brand of masculinity. Throughout the show's history, we have been treated to countless lectures and monologues from Trent about what it means to be a man. It means working with your hands. It means providing for your family. It means a steady paycheck, a traditional career path, and an unshakable work ethic. His own life is his primary evidence. He worked at a college, a stable, respectable job. He flips cars. He does his own landscaping. He is the provider, the fixer, the undisputed king of his castle. This isn't just his life. In his mind, it is the only way for a man to live. Now, look at Jonah. From a young age, Jonah has never quite fit that mold. He's quieter, more introverted, more sensitive. His interests have always seemed to lie outside of the loud, hands-on world his father inhabits. But instead of recognizing and nurturing these differences, Trent has viewed them as weaknesses, as personal failings that needed to be corrected. The car salesman job wasn't chosen because it was a good fit for Jonah's personality. It was chosen because it was a good fit for Trent's idea of a man. A sales job requires a certain kind of aggressive, outgoing personality, something that is clearly draining for Jonah. But for Trent, it checked the boxes. It was a real job, it had the potential for good money, and it was something he could understand and respect. Jonah's failure in that role was inevitable, not because he was lazy, but because he was a square peg being hammered into a round hole by a father who refused to see his son for who he actually was. Compile the clips. Watch every conversation where Trent talks about work. He doesn't talk about fulfillment or passion or finding a career that aligns with your skills. He talks about duty, about numbers, about providing. He is trying to clone himself, to create a successor to his own brand of manhood. He's not raising a son. He's trying to build a legacy in his own image. This relentless pressure created a no-win situation for Jonah. If he pursued a path that genuinely interested him, something perhaps more creative or less conventional, it would be met with scorn and derision from his father for not being a real job. But if he tried to contort himself to fit his father's expectations, he was doomed to fail and suffer the psychological consequences of living an inauthentic life. The career uncertainty we see isn't a sign of laziness. It's a sign of a young man paralyzed by the fear of his father's disappointment. He has no idea what he wants to do because the one thing he knows for sure is that whatever he truly wants won't be good enough for the most important man in his life. This isn't parenting. It's the slow, methodical suffocation of a child's spirit. Trent didn't set Jonah up for success. He set him up for a lifetime of feeling like he could never, ever measure up. The foundation for Jonah's disaster was laid years before the cameras ever started rolling on his adult life, built brick by brick with every lecture about what it truly means to be a Johnston man. If the crushing weight of unrealistic expectations was the kindling, then Trent's public criticism of Jonah was the gasoline poured over the fire. This is where we move from misguided parenting to what can only be described as a deliberate and systematic campaign of psychological sabotage, all captured for the world to see. These are the sabotage tapes, the undeniable, on-camera evidence of a father not building his son up, but tearing him down, piece by painful piece. This wasn't tough love happening behind closed doors. This was a public shaming, orchestrated for a storyline. Let's be brutally honest about what we've seen. Think about the sheer volume of scenes where Trent's primary interaction with Jonah is one of criticism, disappointment, or condescension. It's not an occasional lapse in judgment. It's a consistent pattern of behavior. It's the dinner table interrogations, where a family meal is turned into a performance review. While the other kids might be asked about their day, Jonah is grilled about his job prospects, his savings account, his plans for moving out. Every question is loaded. Every answer he gives is met with a skeptical look or a patronizing sigh. This isn't a conversation. It's a cross-examination designed to highlight his perceived failures. Think of the one-on-one talks that Trent instigates, almost always with a camera conveniently placed over Jonah's shoulder to capture his pained expression. Trent sits him down and lectures him about responsibility, about work ethic, about dropping the ball. He uses phrases like, "I'm just disappointed," or "I expected more from you, son." These words, which would be devastating in private, are delivered as part of a produced television segment. The intention ceases to be about genuine guidance and becomes about creating dramatic content. Trent isn't just talking to his son. He's performing for the audience, positioning himself as the long-suffering father burdened with a lazy, ungrateful child. He is crafting his own heroic narrative at the direct expense of his son's mental health. The belittling isn't always overt. It's often couched in the form of jokes or sarcastic asides. He'll make comments in front of the entire family and even guests about Jonah still living at home or his lack of a girlfriend or his messy room. These aren't just dad jokes. They are microaggressions designed to chip away at Jonah's confidence and assert Trent's dominance. Each jab, followed by a self-satisfied chuckle, reinforces the family hierarchy. Trent is the successful patriarch, and Jonah is the resident failure. The other siblings see it, the audience sees it, and most importantly, Jonah feels it. He is trapped in a role that his own father has written for him. Now, ask yourself a critical question. Why would a parent do this? Why would you choose to have your son's most vulnerable and difficult moments filmed and broadcast? A truly concerned parent would handle these issues with privacy and sensitivity. They would pull their child aside, away from the cameras, and offer support and unconditional love. They wouldn't turn their child's struggle into a season-long arc for a reality television show. The only logical conclusion is that the storyline was more important than the son. This is the central betrayal. The constant public criticism wasn't a clumsy attempt at tough love. It was a calculated strategy to dismantle Jonah's self-worth for the sake of the show. Every time Trent expressed disappointment on camera, he was reinforcing the narrative. Every time he belittled Jonah's efforts, he was ensuring the audience saw his son as a problem that needed fixing. This created a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more Jonah was told he was a failure, the more he believed it. The more he believed it, the more his anxiety grew. The more his anxiety grew, the more he struggled to function. And the more he struggled, the more his father had a compelling storyline to offer the producers. It's a vicious, predatory cycle. Trent wasn't just observing his son's struggles. He was an active participant in creating them. The constant psychological pressure, the public humiliation, the feeling of being a perpetual disappointment. It's no wonder Jonah sought an escape. Trent didn't just witness his son's spiral. He greased the slide. The sabotage tapes prove that this was never about guidance. It was about control, about ego, and about making good television, no matter the human cost. This brings us to the most disturbing and controversial part of this entire saga, the Delta 8 intervention. The official narrative presents this as the moment Trent and Amber stepped in to save their son from a dangerous addiction. But if we apply the lens of a father who prioritizes storylines over his son's well-being, the entire event looks radically different. It shifts from a rescue mission to what some insiders and online investigators have dubbed the Delta 8 setup. This is the most shocking theory, the one the network would never want you to consider. That Trent and Amber didn't just discover Jonah's problem, they knowingly and deliberately exploited it, and perhaps even amplified it, for the show. Now, before we proceed, it's crucial to state that what we are about to discuss is a theory pieced together from insider reports, careful analysis of the broadcasted scenes, and speculation from dedicated viewers who have noticed a disturbing pattern of behavior. There is no smoking gun, only a collection of deeply suspicious circumstances that demand a second look. The theory goes like this. Jonah's reliance on Delta 8 was not a shocking, sudden discovery. It was likely a known issue, a slow burn that had been happening for some time. A young man living at home, under constant pressure and criticism, feeling anxious and depressed, it's hardly surprising that he would turn to a legal, easily accessible substance to self-medicate and cope with his reality. It's plausible that Trent and Amber were aware of his use long before that fateful dramatic phone call. They may have noticed the changes in his behavior, the lethargy, the money being spent. But instead of intervening privately and immediately, the theory suggests they saw an opportunity. The show, which thrives on family drama, needed a powerful, high-stakes storyline for the upcoming season. What could be more compelling than the firstborn son battling a substance abuse problem? Think about the timing. It was, for lack of a better word, perfect. Just as Jonah's career struggles were becoming a tired narrative, a new, much more explosive crisis emerges. According to sources who have claimed to have knowledge of reality TV production, a personal struggle like this is exactly the kind of gold that producers and reality stars who understand the business look for. The theory posits that the producers, with Trent's implicit or explicit blessing, decided to let the situation escalate. They waited for a moment of peak crisis, a moment that would be undeniably dramatic on camera. They didn't just document the problem, they cultivated it. Turning a private, personal issue into the season's centerpiece wasn't a tragic necessity. It was a production choice. This leads us to that infamous phone call, the call that kicked off the entire intervention arc. For many viewers, it felt raw and terrifyingly real. But to a more cynical eye, it plays out almost too perfectly. Jonah, in a state of distress, calls his parents for help. It's the inciting incident, the perfect kickoff to a 3-act story of crisis, intervention, and recovery. The question that has been raised in online forums is a chilling one. Was that call entirely organic? Or was Jonah, in a vulnerable state, perhaps prompted or encouraged to make that call at that specific time, knowing the cameras were metaphorically, if not literally, rolling? We will likely never know for sure, but in the calculated world of reality television, very little happens by accident. Now let's analyze the intervention scene itself. Watch Trent's behavior closely. Discard the narrative the show wants you to see and just observe the man. Many viewers have pointed out that his demeanor seems less like that of a genuinely terrified father and more like that of an actor delivering a powerful monologue. His speech is structured, his points are clear, and he seems intensely aware of the cameras capturing his every pained expression. There is a performative quality to his anger and his sorrow. He seems more focused on making a point for the cameras, on landing his lines, than on connecting with his son's palpable fear and shame. Compare his behavior to Amber's. While Amber often appears genuinely distressed and emotionally overwhelmed, Trent seems to be directing the scene. He controls the flow of the conversation, he sets the tone, and he delivers the ultimatum with a sense of grim finality that plays perfectly for television. The argument here isn't that he felt nothing, it's that his priority was the performance. He was producing a scene in which he was the central hero, the strong father making the tough choice, the savior of his wayward son. The well-being of Jonah in that moment seemed secondary to the creation of a powerful and memorable television moment. It was an opportunity to solidify his image as the unshakable patriarch of the Johnston family, and he seized it. The entire Delta 8 setup theory rests on this foundation, that a family, so enmeshed in the business of being on television, has begun to see their own lives as content first and reality second. Jonah's personal crisis was not a family tragedy to be handled with privacy and compassion. It was a potential plot point, a storyline to be developed, produced, and broadcast for maximum dramatic effect. And at the center of it all was Trent, the father-producer, who allegedly saw his son's lowest point not as a time to protect him, but as a time to exploit him for ratings. The fallout from this televised intervention was as predictable as it was tragic. Jonah was forced to move out. This was framed as the ultimate act of tough love, the necessary push to force him into independence. But was it really about independence, or was it about escalating the drama and tightening the control? Look at the conditions under which he was allowed to leave. He was placed under a strict contract, a behavioral agreement that Trent and Amber could hold over his head. He had to maintain a job, manage his finances, and submit to regular check-ins. On the surface, this sounds like responsible parenting, but in the context of everything we've discussed, it looks like something else entirely. It looks like a new set of strings for the puppet master to pull. This wasn't about fostering genuine, self-motivated independence. Genuine independence comes from within. It comes from making your own choices, learning from your own mistakes, and building confidence in your own abilities. Jonah was given none of that. He was simply transferred from one controlled environment to another, with the ever-present threat of his father's disapproval hanging over him. The contract was not a tool for his growth. It was a tool for Trent's control and a convenient plot device for the show. Every check-in, every conversation about his budget, every question about his job became another scene to film. Another opportunity for Trent to perform his role as the vigilant father keeping his troubled son on the straight and narrow. Jonah wasn't set free. He was put on a longer leash. The grand conclusion we must inevitably reach is as grim as it is inescapable. Jonah Johnston's life is not a disaster of his own making. It is a carefully constructed tragedy, built over years by the very person who should have been his greatest protector. Jonah Johnston was never given the chance to find himself. From a young age, he was presented with a rigid, non-negotiable blueprint for what a Johnston man, is supposed to be. It was a blueprint modeled entirely on his father, Trent, a loud, hands-on, traditionally masculine provider. Any deviation from this blueprint, any hint of a different personality, a different set of interests, or a different path, was treated not as individuality, but as a defect. He was forced to live in his father's shadow, a shadow so vast and so dark that it blocked out any light that might have nurtured his own growth. Every time he stumbled, every time he faltered under the immense pressure to be someone he was not, Trent was there. But he wasn't there to lift him up with quiet encouragement and unconditional love. He was there with a camera crew, ready to push him down for the cameras, to turn his son's pain into a teachable moment for a national audience, a moment that always centered Trent as the wise, albeit disappointed, teacher. The career changes, the lack of motivation, the anxiety, and even the turn to a substance like Delta-8 are not signs of Jonah's personal failure. They are the symptoms of a deeper disease, the psychological toll of living under a constant state of conditional love. He was taught, through years of public criticism and private lectures, that his worth was conditional upon his ability to meet his father's expectations. When he inevitably failed to meet those impossible standards, his self-worth plummeted. He was trapped. To pursue his own path was to accept his father's disappointment. To pursue his father's path was to sentence himself to a life of misery and failure. It is a classic double bind, a psychological prison with no escape. And why? Why would a father do this? We can no longer afford to cling to the naive belief that this was all just misguided, tough love. The answer lies in the harsh reality of their profession. The Johnston family's livelihood depends on the continuation of their television show. And television, especially reality television, thrives on conflict, drama, and resolution. A perfectly happy, well-adjusted family is boring. A family grappling with a problem child, however, is compelling. It creates stakes, it creates tension, and it provides a clear narrative arc for a season. Jonah's disaster isn't a personal failure. It's the calculated result of his father's ambition. An ambition not just for his son to be a certain way, but an ambition for a successful television show. In the cold, hard calculus of reality TV production, Jonah's struggle became a valuable asset. His pain became a plot point. His anxiety became a source of dramatic tension. Trent Johnston, the savvy star of his own show, understood this better than anyone. He didn't just play the part of the concerned father. He produced it. He shaped the narrative, he controlled the optics, and he ensured that his son's lowest moments would translate into the show's highest ratings. This is the ultimate betrayal. It's one thing to have a difficult relationship with a parent. It's another thing entirely to have your personal struggles methodically documented, edited, and packaged for public consumption by that same parent. It is the systematic dismantling of a young man's spirit for profit and fame. Jonah was never just a son. He was a character in a story that his father was writing. And in that story, he was cast as the screw-up, the project, the perpetual disappointment, because that role served the larger narrative that kept the Johnston family on our television screens. The grim prediction for Jonah's future is that unless he can make a fundamental, definitive break from this toxic dynamic, the cycle will continue. He may get a new job, he may find a new apartment, but as long as his sense of self-worth is tied to his father's approval, he will never be free. He will remain trapped in a state of arrested development, forever trying to win a game that was rigged against him from the start. He will continue to be the family's designated problem, the storyline that gets revisited whenever the drama starts to lag. Jonah Johnston's story is a tragedy, but the tragedy is not that he is a failure. The tragedy is that he was never given a fair chance to succeed on his own terms. His wings were clipped before he ever learned to fly, and the person holding the scissors was his own father. So the next time you tune into 7 Little Johnstons, watch with this new perspective. Look past the carefully edited scenes of family fun and folksy wisdom. Pay attention to the power dynamics, the subtle put-downs disguised as jokes, the way one son's struggle is consistently centered as the family's primary source of drama. Ask yourself, are you watching a loving father trying to guide his troubled son? Or are you watching a masterful manipulator, a producer of his own family's pain, who has sacrificed his son's well-being on the altar of television fame? The disaster of Jonah Johnston's life isn't an accident. It's a production. And Trent Johnston is the executive producer.